Maddie Soto, Madeline Soto, her full name, but she went by Maddie to her friends and her family. She's a 13-year-old girl who was found murdered just the other week. Now, Madeline's mother's, Jen Soto, her boyfriend who lived with them, Stephen Stearns, charged not necessarily with the murder at the second of our recording. By the time you see this, he may likely be charged. But he has been charged with possessing child pornography and abusive material on his phone. That material of Madeline Soto, taped in the home that they all shared. Horrible, horrible sexual abuse. And now he, of course, the main person of interest in this case. Jen Soto not really doing herself any favors either. She's mom, pleading early on for her daughter's safe return in a very unempathetic way. And now, looking at the facts of the case, of what we know and timelines, their story not adding up a whole lot either. Joining me to discuss, John Delatorre. Doctor, I got to ask you, when we look at this, I want to first look at this from the perspective of could Jen Soto have been completely oblivious that this abuse was going on in her home for 2 years with the boyfriend? And if so, um, you know, how? Is this something where she was possibly also a victim of the abuse of Stephen as well, and really just kind of had her head in the stand and was going forward? What in a case like this? What do you glean from the behaviors of the dynamic of these three individuals?
That the second part is true. That there's no way that she didn't know that the abuse was happening. But the question then becomes, because she knew, why didn't she do anything about it?
Hmm.
And typically in cases like this, it is also because the mother is being abused as well. Now, what form that abuse takes, who knows? It could be anything. But there's no way that she doesn't know.
How
So
so?
then
Let me ask you that, because I think a lot of people will argue that and say, or from their own past experiences of like, I don't think my mom knew that so and so was abusing me or this or that. Is that always true? Because I mean, you're coming through with a really strong argument there of there's no way she didn't know. Expand upon that a little bit.
s- so I think a lot of times we try to protect ourselves from the negativity that happens within our family. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times the expectation is that stranger danger is more relevant than someone being within our family doing the abusing.
Hmm.
So is it possible for someone to not recall that an abuse was occurring within the family? Sure, that's possible. Is it possible for someone to quote unquote know that an abuse is occurring, but has decided that for whatever reason, they're not going to acknowledge it? Sure, that's just as likely as well. But the reality is that you always knew what was happening. What you've done is decided to protect yourself in whatever way you decided to protect yourself. And I'm not here to judge why someone protects themselves the way that they do. My job is to simply understand that that protection has a consequence and to help the individual move past the consequences of whatever that protection is. But in a house, it's an apartment,
Yeah.
right? It's an apartment. It's what, at most, two bedrooms.
Hmm.
It's small, and there there's nothing about what I see when it comes to this dynamic that suggests that they were quiet, right? That they did, that none of them made any sounds at all. So eh, I I find it very difficult to believe when people say that they didn't know that an abuse was occurring. Whether they acknowledge it or not, that's a different story. But if you did not know that it was happening, then you wouldn't be suffering any kind of consequence.
Hmm.
Because if you don't know something's happening, then why would you be suffering at all?
Sure.
And what we know is that that's not true, right? These individuals, whether they acknowledge the abuse or not, have a trauma response. Where would that trauma response come from if no abuse was occurring? So there's a protection aspect of the inability to recall.
Hmm.
And when I see the mother, she certainly gives off indicators that would suggest, number one, that she knows more than she let on, and number two, that the decisions in her life are being made for her, and that it's a difficult situation for her to be in.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack, and I want to talk about the interview. There's been several interviews that she did while Maddie was missing, quote unquote. But I want to talk about one thing before that, and that would be something that Maddie had told her friends right before she disappeared, saying that she wants to go live in the woods. Is that just a flippant statement of a 13-year-old of, hey, I want to go live in the woods. It looks fun. I like the woods. Or is that someone who is trying to escape their home life, trying to escape where they're at and abuse, which we now know was certainly taking place, and to get away from two people who are clearly not protecting them from evil?
I think it's a little bit of both. If they didn't live near a wooded area, I don't know that she says I want to escape to the woods. I think uh it's it's probably that she finds comfort in there. It's certainly concerning that why would a 13-year-old even be thinking like I want to just live in the woods? Like why would that come around? But I also think that part of it is um because it's there and that's the protective area, that's the time when she probably feels like she can be the most safe and secure, that's why she chose it. So I think both things are kind of playing into her statements about wanting to leave home and live in the woods.
Sure. Everyone grieves differently. We know that. We saw interviews with Jennifer Soto prior to the body of her daughter Maddie Soto being found, and they turned my stomach. They were questionable at best. When I first started diving into this case the other day, I mean, immediately before anyone was even pointing the finger at Jen Soto, saying this doesn't seem to add up, it just felt off. That interview felt very, very off. The one I'm speaking of, and there was two. There was one with Channel 9, and there was one with Fox 35. The Fox 35 interview was very interesting, with the boyfriend who's now been charged showing up in the background of the interview. It's kind of lurking right back there as Jen Soto was trying to give answers to the person asking the questions about where has your daughter been, and those questions that were asked were also, or answered rather, didn't have a lot of consistency to them. Let's first talk about the boyfriend that was in the background and what that may be demonstrating in terms of trying to control the narrative.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting, when compared to the other news outlet interview. I was expecting to see a level of consistency in the mom's behaviors that I didn't see when the boyfriend shows up and he sits in the background. Um, I mean, it's pretty. This is going back to something that we were just talking about. Him going into the background where he knows he can be seen by the camera people that are in the room with them. I'm sorry, but the computer that can be seen, that is, they're using the virtual, and the people that are watching the news broadcast, is pretty. I mean, that's pretty bold. That's a pretty bold move for
Mhm.
someone who is spent probably 2 years trying to keep his domineering and abusive behaviors a secret. So that was a bit unexpected, but there definitely was a sort of uh there's a certain level of control and domineering that was present in that in him getting into the background, that wasn't present in the other interview, the one where the camera people are already inside the house.
Hey, it's Tony Brueski. If you like the podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and press that bell so you don't miss any of our updates on the cases we're following for you right here at the Hidden Killers podcast from True Crime Today. And thanks